Good morning, everyone. My name is Lynn Troy, and I'm the CEO of Troy 7, and I'm currently serving as the Vice Chair for Economic Development for the Huntsville-Madison County Chamber. As a mom, a grandmother, and a small business owner, today's topic resonates deeply with me. Before I was a business owner, I was a young single mom working and finishing college. I know firsthand the need to have high-quality, affordable child care. From an early age, I was consistently balancing work and caring for my family, and I wasn't willing to sacrifice the quality of either, and it wasn't easy. We titled today's summit a workforce discussion. We don't often think about child care as a workforce topic, but we have increasingly seen the impact that a lack of child care has on our workplace because of its impact on those that work with us. The COVID-19 pandemic shone a spotlight on that reality. Some of you attended the Child Care Summit that the Chamber hosted in 2019. Since that time, many things in the world have changed, but many things haven't. The Huntsville region expects to add thousands of jobs in the next few years. Many of those will be in manufacturing, oftentimes with multiple and rotating shifts. Pre-COVID shortages in child care were made worse by many facilities going out of business during the pandemic. The current system of child care is so inadequate to support working families today, and we must improve the quality and the accessibility to meet the workforce demands of the future. A recent study published by Harvard Business School surveyed employers and caregiving employees. While 69% of employers surveyed believed that caregiving responsibilities had no impact on employees' performance at their company, 83% of caregiving employees said that caregiving affected their ability to perform their best at work. 32% of those same employees reported having left a job because of caregiving responsibilities. There's a clear misalignment between employers and employees. While this study showed that employees are struggling to balance work with caregiving, this doesn't account for those who never enter the workforce or are underemployed in roles so that they can manage their caregiving responsibilities. With record low labor participation rates in Alabama and across the country, the Huntsville region is uniquely positioned to address this challenge, and we must do so to continue to grow as a smart place. Today, we will hear an update from the Chamber on a task force and research that was conducted following the 2019 Child Care Summit, followed by an update from the Alabama Partnership for Children. We will learn about best practices and potential solutions to consider. I hope you came here to learn, but also to engage. Following our presentations, we will ask you to collaborate in small groups and to help us begin to work towards solutions. We are known for solving difficult problems, and I am encouraged that you are all here to be a part of doing so. Our first speaker is Beth Zinn, who she consulted with and led our task force for research on behalf of the Chamber. Please join me in welcoming Beth.
Hey, good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing? Great. I'm better after coffee. Well, my name is Beth Zinn, and I'm actually the membership coordinator at South Huntsville Main Business Association. So I know that's kind of, why am I standing here giving you the chamber update? So I just wanted to tell you very quickly, after the Child Care Summit in 2019, and everything kind of shut down after that, the task force sort of stopped work for a little while. And then in January, I guess it was December of 2020, I got a call from the Chamber as I was transitioning from one job to another and asked me if I wanted to come and work and do this research for this child care task force. And I said, sure. So in January of 2021, this year through June of 2021, I was employed by the Chamber to research a variety of topics around child care. And I will tell you, I had no idea when I said yes to this how much information I would dig into and how many rabbit holes I would go down, and ended up producing about a 69-page report at the end of all that, and it probably could have been longer. This is actually an issue that's really important to me. I'm a mom of 3 boys and stayed at home with them for it was either 12 or 13 years, and then decided to re-enter the workforce part-time and kind of start my career over just a few years ago. And going to work part-time, re-entering the workforce, especially in a nonprofit where the money is maybe not as much as it would otherwise be, it was a big consideration for us for me to even do this, but I was fortunate that it was something that I wanted to do, and that it wasn't a barrier for me, but I recognized that it is a barrier for other people. So it's one of those issues that was always in the back of my mind as I was staying at home with my kids, that at some point I was going to re-enter the workforce, and that was going to become an issue at some point. So anyway, when the task force reconvened in January 2020, the goals were as follows. We were going to have monthly meetings where I would present the research and the findings, and we would discuss, and we did this pretty methodically. We decided we were going to create a local employer needs assessment and send it out to a few selected, it was actually a good number of selected chamber members to get feedback from them on this issue and kind of see what they were experiencing both prior to COVID and post-COVID. We wanted to research the possibility of a child care champion designation for employers in our community. We wanted to research child care models and best practices, especially for community-based, corporate, co-op, collaborative child care. We wanted to identify funding possibilities for new child care facilities in the area. And we also wanted to create a child care database that employers and people moving to the area could use as a reference tool. So as a result of this research, the survey, the task force meetings, the task force came up with 3 main categories of recommendations and wrapped up work on this back in June. So the 3 main categories of recommendations from the task force were community conversation, identify ongoing leaders and champions for child care efforts in the community, help companies consider and identify the impact of child care on their workforce. So community conversation. Ultimately, what the Child Care Task Force found, and what was the most important and pressing issue, was to get basically all of you together in a room and have another conversation. There's currently not much local synergy around this issue. People are talking about it individually, and companies are talking about it individually. But we haven't been doing a lot of collective talking anyway because of the circumstances of the world the last 18 to 20 months. But we wanted to reassemble you and just make sure that there was a coordinated local effort to determine the needs of organizations, to connect organizations, and help look for solutions with others who are in the same situation that you are in. So this Child Care Summit is happening today, so that's one of the things that we're sort of checking the box for now. The local child care needs assessment and results. So we did send that out as a task force, and I just wanted to let you know one of the notable findings from that assessment was that of the 40 organizations that responded, there were 10 that didn't know about each other that were interested in collaborating or partnering to find solutions to build a facility. They were willing to put funds together with other organizations and try to figure this out. And after talking to a few of those organizations, we know that they don't know about each other. So that was another reason for us to get all of you together in this room today so that we could identify those people. We thought that having a conversation would help create a strategy around child care issues. And this summit today, when we break out into groups and get your input is going to be part of that strategy. Create a shareable executive summary. As I mentioned, that was part of the task force, that 69-page report. It is something that we can share with government and business leaders in the community. If it's something that you want to see, I think you could probably email Lindsay Ferguson and she can send it to you. But it has lots of concrete suggestions and ways that child care has impacted the workforce even since COVID, and some collaborative solutions. So create opportunities for community leaders to contribute to solutions. We really wanted to, this is one of those opportunities, but we feel like and I'm going to talk about this more in a minute, but there needs to be maybe a central organization that is sort of helping create these opportunities for these leaders to contribute to solutions. So we're going to go on to that. And then contact leaders in other communities with successful child care facility collaborations. And that again goes to what I'm about to talk about. So identify ongoing leaders and champions for child care efforts. This is something that the task force, and I was actually just talking to Gail Piguet, who you're going to hear from after me. This is something that we thought was critical. We noticed that in other communities, there were organizations that were like central repositories of information where this group owned it in the community, and we want to see that. We think this community needs that, and that's how these issues are going to get pushed forward. If we had a central organization that was the repository and the think group that was thinking through these issues on a daily basis and not just here and there, then that group would be able to identify funding, and we would know that that group is the group that is looking for funding, that they're applying for grants, and we just know that they're the people that we would be going to for any information. And talking to Gail, and I know she'll talk about this a little bit more, but even on a statewide level, I thought that there was an organization that was doing all of this. There's not even a central organization on a state level. So it's critical, both on a state level and a local level, that we have an organization that is devoted to trying to solve these issues for our workforce. There. These are just two examples of organizations. Both of these developed out of the United Way. The Child Care Resources Organization is in Central Alabama, and Early Matters Greater Austin is in Austin, Texas. And these organizations, they evolved into organizations that can advocate for change around child care and influence public policy and raise awareness, especially among employers, and that's what some of what their work is. The importance of family-friendly workplaces, which we're going to talk about in a minute as well. So another question, this is a very important element, but another question that the task force asked was, how do we provide our workforce with potential solutions in the interim when we don't have an organization like this? So we thought that there would be ways for us to help companies consider and identify the impact of childcare on the workforce. So we came up with three I think they're relatively simple solutions to start with. But as we go on later today, you may have more, and we're going to take notes and we're going to take this all back. But the first thing is to create a child care needs survey as a resource for our employers. The next one is to collect resources to share with employers to support identified child care needs, and create a child care champion designation or award for local businesses. So the child care needs survey, what I wanted to note about that is that the needs assessment that we did as part of the task force, where we got about 40 responses, about 55% of those that responded said that they had not formally evaluated their employees to see what their employees' child care needs were. Yet 70% of them said that they felt like they were aware. So that may be the case, it may not be the case, but we thought that it would be a great tool if employers in the community had something that they didn't have to generate. They could literally just take it, maybe they could make it their own and send out to their employees so that they could really kind of figure this out. Collecting resources to support employers in their workforce. While we were convening this task force and doing this research, like I said earlier, there is so much information out there, and there are actually so many tools. There's a lot of great, helpful information, but employers don't have the time to go chase it all down, and it's scattered everywhere. So this is really just a list of some things, like if you were to, if we had an organization that could compile all this and be the repository for it, these are just some examples of some things that would be useful. And locally, we have the Rocket City Mom Child Care Directory, which is a comprehensive directory for Madison City, Madison County, and Huntsville City child care and daycare and mom's morning out programs. I think Stephanie's in the audience. She's the owner and the founder. I'm sorry if that's not exactly accurate of Rocket City Mom. But I talked to Stephanie as part of this, and they keep that updated. So it's a great resource, and we decided there was really no reason for the task force to reinvent the wheel. And I know the Chamber's had some conversations with Stephanie, but I don't think this is as widely known about or utilized as it could be. And also, anyway, the Alabama Department of Human Resources also has a child care database. It's not as pretty or really functional as Stephanie's is, but it is out there. The U.S. Chamber has a child care workforce toolkit for employers, and it's pretty comprehensive as well, and I bet most of y'all didn't know that it existed. Again, we talked about creating the sample survey. Alabama Partnership for Children has a website with resources. We could include, if this is something that we decide to go down this path as a community, the Child Care Champion or Family Friendly Workplace designation and all those resources to kind of help get the word out on this. And then there's an Alabama Family Central website, and I think that website, it's that one that arose during the height of the COVID pandemic because there was a need for all these resources to be centralized. So this was actually one of my most favorite parts of the research. These are Child Care Champion Family Friendly Employer designations. So if you think of like the Chamber's Best Places to Work little logo, and companies apply for that designation every year, and you get to use the little logo on your marketing materials. This is kind of the same thing for Family Friendly Workplace or Best Place for Working Parents is a program that is exploding all over Texas. But you see these programs popping up all across the country, and they are raising awareness for employers and employees for the need for family-friendly policies in the workforce in order to attract the best and brightest talent. And so we looked at possibly creating this as a designation in conjunction with the Best Places to Work, and that's something that the Chamber would need to work out. And we, as a task force, recognize that we have diverse industries, that make up Huntsville, and that we don't want this application process to exclude any of those. So, we would want to make sure the questions that we're asking and the policies that we are proposing companies to consider would kind of run the gamut and not exclude any of our manufacturing. For example, you would want it to be fair for a manufacturing company or a company that wanted to have a remote workforce, kind of moving forward. And those things look totally different when it comes to family-friendly policies and child care possibilities. So this is something that I think the reason that I was very excited about this is it feels like something that's very doable, it's tangible, it raises awareness, and it could be a fairly easy, possibly, first step. There are models, like I said, all over the country. They're all really similar to one another, and seems like it would be something that could be easily replicated. So those were basically the highlights of the do-outs, the recommendations of the task force. There were some, like I said, there was a report that was created that you were happy to send to you, but this is just an issue that is so big and so important as Huntsville continues to diversify its economy and grow. And I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to work on this. It opened my eyes to a lot of things I thought I knew. And really one of the surprising things is collaborative and awesome as our community is, it really surprised me that there was not an organization already that sort of owned this. There are lots of organizations individually that are doing awesome work around this issue, but really I think if we could get some synergy around it, as with a lot of other things, we could be the leader, in the state on this issue. So with that, are there any questions?
Is your task force still standing up, or has it been disbanded, inactive?
We haven't been active since June. I don't know if it's been disbanded, but we haven't done anything since June. So that's...
We were really looking to be able to bring everyone back together. We also knew that conversation over Zoom wasn't going to be as effective as it will be with you all in this room. So following this, we would look to kind of repurpose potentially that task force or determine what should that look like going forward. So not disbanded, but maybe a little dormant right now.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I haven't had much time to circulate in the room, but what is the participation today at this event of key employers and CEOs and top-level management? Do we have a lot of that here?
Yes, ma'am. And representatives from nonprofits that are working in this area. So you've got, that's correct, right? Yes. Employers. So you've got the people that have the people, and then you have the people that are the solution providers. So we're hoping that, there can be some real collaboration happen in this room today. Any other questions? Okay, that was 2 more questions than I thought I'd get. So right now I want to go ahead and introduce Gail Piguet, who I had the pleasure of being able to tune into a bunch of Zoom calls. She didn't know I was necessarily there, but a lot of this work we were doing was remote. And Gail is a wealth of knowledge around this issue. She is the executive director for the Alabama Partnership for Children, and she's going to have a lot of details and facts and figures and kind of make this issue really come to life for you.
So, yes, I'm Gail Piguet with the Alabama Partnership for Children. How many of you were at the event 2 years ago? I was hoping we'd have folks who had some history and saw that beginning. We never understand sometimes the intentionality and then the sheer luck. We came together and talked about child care and looked at it real clearly and identified some clear problems. And thanks to the chamber, they invested in somebody to keep this ball rolling and keep it moving. And now we're coming out of the end of a 20-month pandemic. So my purpose today is to just share a little bit about what we knew in 2019, or thought we knew, what has happened in the interim, and then some really important information about what we know about where we are right now, building on what Beth found in your community. Because, until you really understand the point at which you've arrived, I don't think you know a path forward or do it very well. But I am going to be brief. Lauren Lewis is on the staff of the Alabama Partnership for Children. She's here with me today. Prepared these folders. Every bit of data and information that I'm going to just highlight going through this deck of slides is in this folder. When you leave today, if you see extra folders on the tables, take them with you. Share them with a colleague. Anybody who might be interested in this information today. So I will tell you that your weather is a little bit different. I drove up yesterday in a massive thunderstorm south of Birmingham, but enjoyed the gorgeous leaves. This is just such a pretty part of our state. And then I woke up this morning and could not even see the highway. So I don't know what to say about that. I also need to thank Lindsay. We work so well only with local partners. Our agency, the Alabama Partnership for Children, and to Beth's point, our agency is responsible, our goal is simple. Every baby born in Alabama gets everything they need to develop to their fullest potential. That's pretty broad, and that's all we want. That's it. So there's a lot of work there. But that means we are working on strong families, we're working on optimal health outcomes, and we're working on quality early childhood opportunities. So we're on a 3-legged stool, so even for our agency, child care isn't the only thing. So it is fair to say that the laser focus and the continued momentum and energy needs to be housed somewhere. When folks wake up every day and they don't have to worry about children's health insurance, they don't worry about state pre-K because somebody else is doing that. They're worried only with child care, and I think that's necessity. And in fact, Beth, it's even better built out at the local level. They can feed into a state entity or an organization, but I think it's more critical at the local level that there be that holding body that embraces the work and doesn't have anything else. If we could introduce who helped us get here today, the Alliance for Early Success provides funding to the three of us, Voices for Alabama's Children, Alabama Partnership for Children, and the Alabama School Readiness Alliance. And our agency has enjoyed this funding for several years, and it puts us in connection and contact with leaders across the country. It provides some financial resources to buy your eggs and bacon and hash browns and fruit. All that we had today, the breakfast was delicious. Lindsay, thanks for organizing everything here. And I think Allison Mullendorf with the Alabama School Readiness Alliance is here. Yeah, there you go.
Taking a photo of you.
And you'll hear from her later. Again, this kind of gets us how we get Linda Smith meet with us today. So, where we are. These are the basics. These things have not changed. If anything, the number is increasing. Now, two things. Pre-COVID, we had somewhat good data. During COVID and now post-COVID, we don't have much good data. It just, you know how everything else took a breather and relaxed and can't find milk or whatever? Well, data is kind of in that same category. But this is where we start. This is the premise, and we know this is a fact. Okay? Have I got the clicker?
There's one in there.
No, there's not. Oh, yes, there is. Lindsay. She is so good, Lindsay is. And wonder how one uses it. It's not working that way. Okay, Lindsay, look at this. I was talking with Beth. In the early 90s, I was in K through 12 higher ed, enjoying a really good career, lastly at the College of Business at Auburn University. And the 90s brain research came out, and I'm reading it, that 95% of brain development happens before children ever get to school. Well, we must be doing this backwards, all the way backwards. So I changed career paths, been in it ever since, because the potential we have, and we always frame this as a workforce issue. We always do, because that's why you're here. That's why the Chamber is studying the child care issue. It is a necessary support for working families. It also provides the best opportunity of any that's ever been designed and researched and reported on, the best opportunity to level the playing field and to reduce the number of children who walk into our schools 2 years behind. It's irrefutable. And you know, as an educator and in the social science world and everywhere else I might find myself, there is no one piece of research other than that brain research and that what I just said that in 30 years has never been refuted. In fact, it's been strengthened year after year after year. So we know where the key is. Okay? I can't work this thing. So thank you, Lindsay. What we know, and I need you to know this about, I'm going to talk a little bit about the unique aspects of child care. During the global pandemic, when schools closed, when schools went remote, whatever, when schools went hybrid, whatever they did, no teacher missed a salary. No school missed funding based on ADA. Hey, we're in a pandemic. That was just suspended. Head Start programs the same way. State pre-K programs the same way. But guess what happened in child care? If parents can't come or are not coming because they're afraid of COVID, you don't get your fees and you don't get paid. Now, we were very active with, there is a child care coalition that Voices for Alabama's Children created Well, we had a task force, or we had something going on, but when this pandemic hit and we saw how it eviscerated the child care industry, we collected this group back together. We used every Zoom meeting we could to learn about best practices, what can this relief money be used for, and to its credit, our State Department of Human Resources listened to our recommendations, and they sent payments to the child care centers, not based on attendance. They sent it on enrollment, and then the last round of sustainability grants, it was just to keep, we already know we lost 14 to 15% of our child care programs. This was to keep the rest of them alive and with their doors open, even if at half capacity. So the second round was simply based on your license capacity. So if you were licensed for 200 kids, you got a dollar amount for those 200 kids. So we used our relief money well. The best news I can share with you today, and this is going to start and supposed to be the first payments out the door in December, is something I would call hazard pay for child care staff. That's the bus driver, that's the cook, that's the director, that's the teacher, the assistant teacher. Anybody in your center gets a dollar payment that for full-time staff will be the equivalent of $6,000 added on to regular income. And for somebody that makes $8.50 an hour, which is our average, that will be amazing. And we're going to have those subsidies to child care staff for the next 2 years. Hallelujah, hurrah, somebody say amen. That's a good thing. The other thing that, again, we knew in 2019, but it hit us back in the face, we have an aging workforce in the child care industry, particularly in family child care. And when Beth talks about rotating every kind of shift, the first work I ever did was Uniroyal, which is Michelin, largest employer in East Alabama at the time. They had shifts I couldn't even put a name to. And when we talk about that, we have to look at family child care options, because a family child care provider can open at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And you're in a home environment, it's a sometimes better place for infants and toddlers to be in someone's home, in bed for the night while mom or dad is sleeping. But we've got to look at the aging workforce as well. Thank you, Lindsay. So I've described the emergency relief. We did a very, very good job. They don't get us to the underlying issues that were there in 2019 that were just brought to glaring light during a global pandemic. And I guess, and I hope, I know I've asked Linda Smith to share some of the best practices from across the country, but if you'll look at what we are dealing with, and I've mentioned the aging workforce, but it's more than that, okay? This is what's happened, and how we're trying to reopen has been a challenge in some communities in some rural areas. You think about in a rural area, if you lose 20% of your child care providers, you don't have but one left. That's what it means in a rural area. And it may be a family child care option where only 6 slots. So that is difficult. Here's what we're dealing with right now, and again, we are pushing at the federal level, state level. We have been very successful getting support to child care so more and more could stay open, but it's that last bullet that is the elephant in the room, that if we don't address the rest of everything we do around quality is a poor investment, in my opinion. If we invest in training and we invest in high skills, we want teachers highly skilled, well educated. We'll even give scholarships for that. Our agency's done it since we've existed because we believe in it. If we do all that and don't pay a decent wage, all of that investment walks out the door at the first opportunity. And when it walks out the door, and at our agency, I told you, we're strong families, health, and high quality early childhood education. So when that happens and that family sometimes is lifted out of poverty, we clap, celebrate, hooray, and amen. It's a good thing. But then we start all over because of the wages we pay. And that has got to be addressed. Thank you, Lindsay. Let's move through. This is and you've got a printed copy of this that hopefully you can see better than this. This is comparing 2010 to 2021, just the number of child care options available in our state. And the graphic is, it's astounding. And this is not because of the pandemic. We were heading in this direction before the pandemic. And again, at the time when Alabama's going to need 500,000 skilled workers by 2025, y'all, it's fixing to be 2022. We're getting there pretty quickly. This is from your community. I asked several questions, and I know you've had this task force, and I appreciate the question of, is it still going forward? Is it going to work? These are the critical issues. Insufficient supply, just showed you the graphic. We understand that. Long wait list, cost and hours of care, especially in the growing manufacturing sector. You know, when I describe you folks all over the state and around the country, I say, oh, that's where all our rocket scientists are. It's just, you know, Huntsville is just different. It's special. It's got all this new investment coming in, and a lot of that will be manufacturing jobs. And those child care concerns are a little bit different, both paying for child care and the options that you need that will suit the workforce. Okay? Best ideas, specific things mentioned in the North Huntsville Industrial Park, West Huntsville, Limestone County, create a child care champion type program. That's worked very well. I shared at the last time we convened, I had the pleasure of creating the Employers Child Care Alliance. That was the name of it in East Alabama. It was headed up by Uniroyal Michigan, major manufacturer, but then Auburn University was in it, some banks were in it. Everybody impacted by child care created that alliance, and that's what they did. They did things like Adopt a School. You know what Adopt a School is, but they did it with a child care center. We found a place where East Alabama Medical Center had 30 families enrolled, and that's where they paid for the quality enhancement partnership. They paid for some stipends for teachers, for scholarships, just a good connection there. And then engaging, Beth mentioned most of these items, adding to the state and federal advocacy agenda. Okay, and you're in District 5, you're somewhere in the middle here. But according to this Bipartisan Policy Center, your gap in access is 39.6%. And you are District 5. Yes, okay, thank you. Cost of care, that alone is the reason why child care is not a market that can be influenced by typical market influences of supply and demand. Parents can't pay anymore, and as much as they're paying, their teacher is still getting $8.50 an hour, so it's untenable. And there is no good business model here. It has to be drastically changed. Got to be fixed. Okay, what does this mean for business, community, and employers? What can local government, business employers do? I would just challenge you to say, if we don't, doing nothing is not our option. So let's learn today. Let's look at best practices. Like I said, we've got a ton of material that you can, if you're interested, follow up on in the folders. But it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Linda Smith from the Bipartisan Policy Center, who is going to join us. How many of you have been on a Zoom call in the last 3 weeks? Okay, I've learned 4 or 5 different platforms, and I'm so happy to be here today in your presence, sharing coffee and a meal with you. I think we've missed a lot by not having that human contact, and I'm glad we're on the far end of it. Linda is the director of the Bipartisan Policy Center's Early Education Development Initiative. Most recently, she was a Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Administration for Children and Families, which is in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. That's where Head Start, Early Head Start, and the Child Care Development Fund, which funds 98% of the support for child care in our state, comes from the Child Care Development Fund. She also was previous executive director of the National Association of Child Care Resource and Referral Agencies, an entity that at the national level does what Beth and I have described that we really want at the state and local level. More importantly, she was director of the Office of Family Policy for the Secretary of Defense, where she was one of the primary architects of the military's child care program. She's also held positions with both U.S. Army and the U.S. Air Force. I salute her and say, yes, ma'am, every time we're in a room together. But we are honored to have her. She doesn't, I just at the last minute said, I need you, Linda, because we've got this group who knows some things, who understands some things, who has a need to move forward with some concrete solutions. And I'm so happy she can be here today with us to provide that opportunity. Welcome, Linda Smith.
Well, thank you. I know this isn't ideal, and I apologize for that, everyone. I really wish I could be there in person. And I also have relatives in Birmingham and wish I could come down there to see them. So in any event, I want to start by thanking Gail for the invitation and the chamber and everyone who's interested in this subject. What I'm going to try to do today, I did tell Gail that I would get to what are some promising practices, some models that are going on around the country, and try and link you all up with some places where you might have some things in common with either other chambers or other communities that are really taking on this challenge. But before I do that, I have found over many years of doing this that it's good to start with the basics of childcare. So Mimi, do you want to go to the next slide? This is an overview of what we're going to talk about today, just the childcare problem. What is it anyway? Gail touched on many of these things, so I will skim a lot of it. But the basic assumptions, some things that we can agree on. What are the specific challenges for Northern Alabama and Huntsville in your region? What's the underlying business model here, and what do we need to fix? Before we do a plan to fix childcare, we need to understand what's wrong with childcare. And I think I'll spend some time on that, and then get into going forward. What are some practical solutions from around the country where people have worked really hard to solve this problem and end up with a conversation and some questions and answers. So go to the next. You can skip the next one, Mimi, quickly. I just put this up there. Gail started her remarks talking about the neuroscience. What I try to see to make sure that everyone agrees with some basic principles here, what the foundation that we're trying to build on. And I think our country, especially over the last 2 years, has come to understand just the importance of this and accept this. But we do know the neuroscience is there, and it's crystal clear. It gets clearer all the time. The data is there, the research is available. We know that care and education are inseparable. And I think this is one of the things that sometimes people still haven't got that. They think that childcare is somehow just care and somewhere else children are educated. Anyone in the room in one of our previous speakers, or two of them both, said they were parents, know that children learn 24/7. So you can't put them in a care situation without having them learn something. And I think that is something that this country has got to come to grips with, that they are one and the same. The quality of that care is highly dependent on the workforce. And I think everyone has come to understand that we have a workforce problem in childcare as well as a workforce problem across the country. That childcare is essential for our families, that it costs more than most can afford to pay. There is a public acceptance now that we have a shortage of this. Obviously, you all wouldn't be in this room if you didn't think that. We also believe as a country that parent choice is a fundamental value. And so whatever we do to work on the childcare supply issue, that needs to be at the basis of what we're trying to do. And I think we now know that everyone benefits from childcare, that businesses, healthcare, education, we're all in this together. So let's go to the next slide, Mimi. I want to talk to you a little bit just about the basics of childcare in this country. And I know that Gail has provided you with with quite a bit of information that is Alabama specific. I can reference some of that as I go along. Nationally, we had in 2016, the last year that we had a count, 675,000 businesses. Gail mentioned the number lost in the pandemic in Alabama. Nationally, we think we've lost about 10% of our supply that probably will not come back. It looks a little bit like what you see there, 75,000 roughly centers, close to 600,000 family childcare homes. They are mostly women-owned businesses, and they're mostly small businesses, with the average size of a childcare center across the country serving fewer than 50 children. If you look at the 50% fewer than 50, 18 between 50 and 75. So these are pretty small businesses with, a smaller number of employees. The annual revenue in the last year we had, it was $47.2 billion. Next slide, please. So here's the basics in terms of the employment side. Childcare employs roughly 2 million workers. They're split evenly between centers and homes across the country. We have, as I think Gail mentioned this, we do have an aging workforce with a lot of our people working in childcare over the age of 50, which has implications for the near term as we try to dig our way out of the pandemic. How many of these people are coming back to work is a big question. And we hear reports from across the country that our skilled and our most educated workers are the ones that are not coming back to us. 52% of the workforce has an AA degree or higher. I think this is a surprise to a lot of people because I think there's a perception that it's not a well-educated workforce, but it's much higher, and it's been growing over the last couple of decades. Shows the percentage that are female right there. And then the average length of time, this was pre-COVID, that a center-based teacher was working in the field 10 years and over 13 years for family childcare. You often hear this, oh, the childcare workforce turns over at a very rapid rate. We think that the turnover is within the field, not leaving the field, based on the data that we have. The average wage here, and this is lower in Alabama, as Gail said, but the average wage across this country is less than $12 an hour. And that is right around poverty level for a family of 3, as it shows. About half of our childcare workforce is eligible for public assistance programs, which is, I think, a shame on us for that. And most lack benefits, including health insurance. And that was particularly a problem during COVID. Yet these people at low pay, no health care themselves, were still considered essential workers during COVID. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so Gail said this, and this is pretty much on target across the country, that about 2/3 of all children under the age of 6 have all available parents in the workforce. Now, that's interesting because only 1/3 of parents in this country actually pay for care. So that means that that we have a lot of children out in care somewhere that we have no idea what is going on with these children, what the quality is, how any of the things that would contribute to their long-term educational success are probably really in question. Then looking at the average cost, Gail talked about this as well, but these are ranges. There is no average in this country in terms of the cost of care, but suffice it to say that it is expensive. And basically we have a system where it simply costs more than parents can afford. So if we go to the next slide, this is one of the things, if I were in the room, I would ask you all to be raising your hands and telling me what you think is the biggest challenge, because as you begin to tackle the problem of childcare in Northern Alabama and in Huntsville, you really need to understand what it is you're trying to fix about childcare. So is it just the lack of care? Is it the cost of care? Is there a quality problem? We hear all the time now from families that the operating hours of childcare are out of sync with their work hours. And if you look at the service industry, retail industry, a lot of occupations where young families are involved, they don't work 8 to 6. They work hours outside of that. And so we do have an operational problem with childcare programs. Now, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it's safe to say that if you ask programs to extend their hours, it costs more, not less. And I think that's one of the things that people have got to consider. Or as I asked the question, is there something else that is a problem in the Huntsville area that you need to address? And these things, I would say to you all, are only questions that can be asked and answered by those of you in this room. I think a lot of times people think that the national scene answers the questions. It does not. These are very specific to a community. So let's go to the next slide. Now, as Gail said, and she showed the slide by the congressional districts, BPC has been working on mapping the gap of childcare across the country. We have finished 35 states. You can go and look at the map of Alabama on our website. It's called childcaregap.org. I pulled off of the Alabama website, the Huntsville data. What you see on the maps, or when you go look at them, where we have a real supply gap, and you'll see in Huntsville. Now, I don't know the layout of the city of Huntsville, and you all do, but if you go to the website, you can zero in on these and you can tell where you have a gap. Now, one thing that we do know as part of the work that we've been doing with the gap is to try and figure out where parents want childcare. And almost 2 to 1, and I can refer you to the data on this. We've surveyed this a couple of times, and we're fairly confident on this one, that for 2 to 1, parents want childcare closer to home than they want it closer to work. Now, as a group of business people, that should be something that you give some serious thought to. And that's probably going to be even more of an issue as more businesses go to, some type of remote work, partial, some hybrid model of that. As I say to people here, I live in Alexandria, Virginia. I go into DC to work. I'm not going to go take my children 2 days into DC if I'm working remotely in Alexandria. So the nature of work and work site is changing. And I think it's something that you as a chamber, as a group of business people should consider as you think about what the needs are going to be of your parents. I think the other thing that we did, and we just published very recently, we looked at the economic impact of the gap, only the gap in the 35 states that we have mapped so far. And that is the economic impact in the Huntsville area of the gap of not having enough childcare. We looked at 3 factors when we did the economic impact, and it was the loss to businesses, the loss to family income, and the loss in tax revenue to the community, to your governments. So there are a lot of factors you can consider when you do economic impact, and probably half of this room is much smarter than I am about this. But we did want to quantify that this does have a significant impact on our communities. So to the next slide, Mimi. This is where I'm going to get into what is the business of childcare. Before you can fix a problem, you have to understand it. And so I have found over many years of doing this, it's always good to go back and make sure that everyone is on the same page. So I'm going to run through this very quickly and hopefully not bore half of the room that already understands this, okay? We do have a market-based system of care in the United States. And that's a really important thing to know. And Gail mentioned it several times in her remarks. what we have is a very diverse set of childcare arrangements, and I don't have to point out the fact that you can drive down, you can see a home-based care, you can see a kinder care in a neighborhood, you can see a little childcare center in a church, you can see a childcare center in a strip mall. I mean, they're all over the place, and that's how diverse our childcare market really is. They're both for-profit and not-for-profit. They get most of their funds from what we call the public source, which is vouchers and private pay parents. All of that said, it's very labor intensive, and I'm going to show you that in just a minute. So what it amounts to, as with any business, when you have a product that you are producing, that in order to provide I say reasonable, and I would love to be able to say high quality, but a reasonable quality care is more than the average customer can afford to pay, then the business model is broken. And childcare as a business model, I will assure you, is a broken business model. We simply cannot deal with the quality issues. Back to the workforce, where we know that the quality of the workforce is the key to the quality of the care these children are getting. And you can't get quality on $12 an hour. So next slide, we have a failing business model. Now look at the demand side of the equation. For the past several years, and as a matter of fact, right now in what's being proposed in the Build Back Better plan, the attention is really on the demand side of the equation. In other words, what is it that parents want from childcare, and how are we going to get them the funds to buy it? So the cost of care for parents is recognized, and parents' ability to pay for infant care in particular. We know we have an infant care crisis. So as I said, there's two major sources, the vouchers and then the private pay parents. So go to the next slide, Mimi. If you look at why the demand side is a problem, it has to do with the instability of the income coming into these programs. And again, Gail talked a little bit about this when COVID hit and programs closed, there was no revenue coming in and people lost their jobs. It's that simple. The instability of the income coming into the programs is a problem, and it's one that has to be addressed if we're going to ever fix childcare in this country. So essentially, the reason it's a problem, and we heard it during the pandemic, and I hear it all the time, parents' needs change, and as a result, they come and go from childcare. Sometimes their preferences change, and they change particularly as their children age. So the older the children, the more parents want their children in organized care that provides the intellectual, the cognitive skills, and the social emotional development. And the final thing is the parent's ability to pay varies a lot. A parent can lose a job, especially in our service industry areas where parents' hours deviate, they go up and down. So as a result of all of this, directors of childcare programs are reluctant to raise the pay of the teachers for fear they won't have the revenue to cover it. It's really that simple. And so in order to be able to raise the pay of our workforce, we have got to figure out how to stabilize the funding in these childcare programs so that it's reliable enough that these directors of programs will raise wages. So go on to the next slide. So now let's kind of look at the supply side of the equation. Childcare, as we know, it's labor intensive, and there you see it. For the most part across this country, it accounts for 75% of the costs of these programs, labor, and labor is not very flexible. You may be able to shave labor costs around the edges, like, you know, the children go home, so you send the staff home early or something like that. But in effect, you need staff there and you're going to have to pay them. So it's the biggest single problem that we have to deal with. The labor is based on adult-child ratios, as we all know, and the ages of the children served. Here's where it gets a little tricky, because we have, and in the work that we've done, we always ask the capacity as well as the enrollment of the programs, because that's a real critical difference. And no childcare program that I know of operates 100% year-round at 100% in capacity. Back to what I said about the parents coming and going and their decisions, their income changes, all of these things affect the enrollment of these programs. And finally, the wages. So what I did on this little box is just give you an example again of why this system is in such dire straits right now. If you look at an infant the infant care for infants, in most places in the United States, infant care is 1 adult for every 4 infants. The programs are mostly open 12 hours a day. So that doesn't mean 1 person for infants. It means 1.5 people are needed to cover the hours that the program's open. The average teacher wages based just on the $12 an hour are $180 a day. That's pretty impactful. The average reimbursement rate, or the average rate that we're paying for infant care in this country, is right around the $43, $45 a day. So if you look at that, before they actually are are trying to do, to make a living, they're pretty much at a loss. So we all know that also the impact pre-K is having potentially on childcare, because the 1-to-4 ratio in the infants is offset by a higher ratio, usually 1-to-10 or 12 in the infant or the 3 and 4-year-olds. If you take the 3 and 4-year-olds out, as we're looking to do in universal pre-K, the costs are going to go even higher in the infant toddler program. So again, this something that your community needs to be thinking about is, what is your need for infant care, and what is the true cost of infant care, with the 3s and 4s perhaps not there to offset the actual costs. So if we could go to the next slide. As I said, most programs don't operate at 100% occupancy. Parents resist paying when their children aren't there, and justifiably so. I mean, they're strapped for money anyway, and they don't see why they have to pay if their child doesn't attend. However, the provider still has to pay the staff for those days. And I've talked about the offset here. What I like to say to people is, when you're considering what you're going to do, think of this as a balloon, and you try to figure out where you're going to squeeze it and what's going to pop out. So for example, if you pay the staff more, obviously you have to charge the parents more. If you pay less, the reverse is true. So if you take the 3s and 4s out, then you have to increase the fees for the infants and toddlers. So what have we learned? What we've learned here, next slide, Mimi, is that a pure market approach to childcare doesn't work. And the profit margins are just too thin to sustain a normal business and have any reserves. And that we learned in COVID that they can't survive these lengthy closures that happened during the pandemic or any other thing for that matter. They don't have enough money to even cover fixed costs. And so what that amounts to is, and I'm going to point to some things that we've done on this. The result is that we have a lack of capital in our childcare programs and no ability to do much in the terms of investing in facilities or expansion or even improvement. We've done a lot of looking at the state of childcare facilities in the United States, and we have a very serious problem of lead, all types of things in childcare in some of our cities. So next slide. A next question I would like for all of you now to think about is, what is the role of business in this? And what is the role of the community writ large? Because I think we can safely say that childcare providers alone are not going to be able to fix the problem. And we will not have enough capital in the childcare community to expand and meet that gap that we looked at earlier. So we have a gap problem, we've got an impact problem, but we've got a community that are very nice people, and I think Gail would agree with me on this, but they really never went to school to be business people. They went to school to be early childhood, child development people. And we've got to begin to figure that out. So all of that said, and it's complicated, what I want to do now is move forward to looking at some solutions. What have we seen around this country that you might look at? And next slide. Okay, so we have, as you saw, two really basic options. The home-based care, family child care, whatever you want to call it, and center-based care. So I'm going to talk about what we have seen around the country with the home-based care and what businesses can do and what is going on out there. One option is that businesses can contract directly with a provider. So if you have a small business, you don't have enough to support any type of big operation, but you need, for example, infant care. Your business could contract with a provider to keep spaces available for infants. So that's one thing that we've seen some going on, and it'll be interesting to see what happens as we come out of COVID. Another one is the use of third-party contracts. So you contract with a provider who then contracts with the childcare providers, family childcare. So for example, there's a couple of these around the country. All Our Kin up in Connecticut is a good example of one of these. The Wonder School, there's some Wonder School projects, I think, in Alabama. So if you look at that, you can contract with that company, and the company will help you find childcare and do the work for you in terms of setting up, getting childcare available to you. These funded provider networks, there's also a model out of Bozeman, Montana called My Village, that they contract over with technology, and they help childcare providers get established, get the training they need, manage their businesses, etc. Contracting with a group like that to recruit and get quality in family childcare. Those are some options that people are thinking about and using more in rural areas than in the cities, but they're good options where you don't have any. And I think there's some research now that's been done that even though some of these programs, for example, Wonder School and My Village, take a percentage, the income of the provider still goes up because of the better business practices that they have. There's one thing that we've talked to some people about I talked to some group folks up in Iowa about the possibility, and I want to follow up to see what they've done with it, of a business actually employing a childcare provider. So in other words, you contract directly with the childcare provider, and she keeps her spaces open for you. It's one more person on the payroll, but the provider has, guess what, a stable income, generally gets benefits that they don't get elsewhere, and has, that reliability, which keeps her doors open. So there was a group up in northern Iowa that was interested in thinking about that. That's an option if you don't need a lot of care. Provider co-ops, one of the things that we have seen coming out of the COVID experience are what we call co-ops or pods, where a person is hired by a group of parents. And this happened probably much to the chagrin of some childcare providers. When they had to lay their staff off, the parents got together and started working directly with the teacher that their child had and employing her through 3 or 4 parents to provide that care. In some cases, that may be backfiring on childcare, but good for parents in that those parents like that option, and the providers are pretty happy with it, and actually in some cases making more money doing that. Provider grant programs where the state or the community gives grants to program or providers to start up. And Maryland is a good example that's been doing that for a number of years. And then obviously the early Head Start Child Care partnerships, which I know Alabama has one that's a family child care model. And I think that those are some family child care home-based options that you can look for. If down the road you think you want to do any of those, I can certainly give Gail the points of contact for some of the people in these communities where that's happened. So if we want to move forward now to the next slide, and some center-based solutions that communities are looking at. Obviously, new construction or renovation are options. They are expensive, generally speaking. One of the things that we have found is that there's not much difference between renovation and the cost of new construction when it comes to childcare, because most facilities don't have like the plumbing, some of the things that we need in early childhood. So it's major work to renovate. There is actually a group down in Atlanta, Georgia, which I say here, the Early Learning Property Management Group, where they actually renovate facilities and then lease them out to childcare. So it's a reuse. And they have done, I think, 13 or 14 facilities now where they've gone in and taken a school, renovated it, and then leased it out. And they maintain it too, because that's another part of the childcare problem, is that there's not enough money for the maintenance and so forth. If you look at school facilities, there are several examples around the country where schools have been converted into childcare programs, sometimes by the schools themselves and sometimes by the community. In Coffeyville, Kansas, for example, the school needed childcare for their teachers and their school staff, so they actually took a school and turned it into a childcare center, and it was actually done by the school system itself. In Missoula, Montana, the chamber actually got involved with renovating a school and turning it into an infant care program. So it depends on who basically is interested and takes the lead. In case of Detroit, Philanthropy and the Kresge Foundation is putting several childcare facilities on the ground, working with community development financial institutions, CDFIs. And then in one place in Columbus, Ohio, the Reeb Center is a joint use facility where they incorporated both Head Start and childcare into a community type center, where the construction was basically sponsored by a joint task force between the city and philanthropy in the city. So there's some examples, there's plenty of things going on around the country. Again, though, figuring out what your needs are in the greater Huntsville, Alabama area before you decide what you're going to do. Because you could build a childcare center. I often say we could build it and they might not come. And so we really do need to be careful about what our choices are. So next slide, moving forward, looking at this, the chamber, and it's really welcome that you all are interested and that businesses are interested, because businesses benefit from this. Who are the other players in a town? In some communities, the economic development folks, transportation planners have an interest in this and should be involved. The faith community, you cannot exclude the faith community. Many of our childcare programs are in faith facilities, and there's also capacity in faith facilities. And so I would urge you to reach out to the faith community. As I said, the schools, government, CDFIs are a big part of solutions in many parts of this country Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, the Northeast has got, Detroit, Illinois. A lot of states are using CDFIs as the go-to for solutions. Community foundations, and somebody talked about the issue of surveys. And I would say that surveys are important, so are surveys as well as focus groups with parents. One of the things that we have found in the work that we have done is that parents will, first of all, parents really, have very specific and clear preferences, and you need to understand what they are in your community. So surveying gets at that, so do yes, focus groups, and they're very important. I would caution people on the use of surveys, that they are important to do, but they should not be taken as complete gospel, if you will. Back to my days in the Pentagon, when we were looking at building a childcare center for the Pentagon, we surveyed I think there are 27,000 people work there, something like that. We surveyed the Pentagon. We had over, I think it was close to 4,000 people come back and say they would use a childcare center. We opened a childcare center for 200, and it took a year to fill it. So I think parents will say they'll use a childcare center, but will they really? Are they couching their bets? So I just caution people about doing surveys and using them for much more than one piece of the puzzle. I would not go beyond that. Some of the other people that need to be at the table, providers and parents, housing is a huge piece of this. And there's a lot of money going out through the infrastructure bill that just passed. So think about housing in your community. Where are you going? Where's there going to be housing? And how do you begin to incorporate childcare in those communities before they actually start construction? We did some work in a neighboring state, North Carolina, and in looking, when we were talking to where there's this huge gap in childcare in this one part of a community, and in talking to the state people, they looked at the map and they said, oh, well, we know why that is. There's a new business going in there, and there's a huge housing development. That's why there's a gap. Well, you have a business going in and you have housing going in, but nobody thought to think, to put childcare in the plan. And that's why economic development and the business community should be at the table. Rural development, obviously, in rural parts of the state, that's a huge thing. The next slide just gives some sources of funding, and we can talk more about those, or we could give you more references. We have a couple of documents that we can share with Gail that you can look at in terms of where some of these sources of money that explains them. So the loan grant programs, CDFIs, as I said, HUD, and the community development block grants, rural development, the CRA, the investments that banks have to make, philanthropic, and then the business centers. So one more, and then I'll shut up here. I hate not being in a room with you guys, because I always really like to talk to people and get your input. It just doesn't work in this format. But moving forward, the final solutions, I would say it came up in Beth's remarks and in Gail's. You guys, one thing that we have seen across the country is you need to identify one person or agency to lead whatever it is you're going to do on childcare, because otherwise nothing gets done. And I would point to work going on in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where philanthropy has funded a person actually that is working now in the city of Pittsburgh to coordinate all of the activities around childcare and getting childcare into the greater Pittsburgh, Allegheny County area. So first task, should you decide to take the challenge, is to identify a person to lead this work. then I quantify the gap. You've got a lot of that work has already been done. It shouldn't be that hard. And then we just talked about the surveys. They need to be done, but they also need to be taken, as an indication, not the gospel. Ensuring community support. We just put a document out where community foundations have done a lot of work around marketing campaigns in a city. You might look to your community foundations to see what their interest is in working on this. What are your options, your costs, and then identify resources. And I know that all sounds very glib and too easy. It's a very difficult challenge that you're facing, but there are a lot of solutions going on and around the country, and we're always happy to try and link communities up with people that are doing some of this work. So I'm going to skip over, if you will, Mimi, to the last slide. We have included in the slideshow a number of resources that are on our website that you can look at: the economic impact and the gap assessment. The data we have, state data is laid out. You've got a lot of that already. So the two documents that I think are pretty important is the from the ground up, where we really describe some of the what's going on around the country, and we'll probably be adding to that in the next 6 months or so. And then I think the final one is that we are about to publish a report of the work we've done around the country in focus groups and work with businesses in communities around the country that describe some of the things that they're doing in some cities around the country. So with that, I'm going to stop and say, I hope that there are some questions and I haven't just put you all to sleep. I can't see your faces, so I don't know.
Right here in the front.
Linda, what's one city that you've seen in all your research that's really hitting on the most lanes at the same time, doing a good job addressing childcare? As you've looked at all these cities and taken in all this information, what's one city that seems to be doing it right?
That is a really good question. And I could name a whole lot of cities that are doing pieces of it right. And as far as a comprehensive model for a city, I'm kind of stuck, to be honest with you, how to answer that. I'd like to give it some more thought. I do think that Pittsburgh is really trying hard to tackle this problem in a broad way. The chamber up there is really involved. The university is really involved. Philanthropy is involved. And I could connect you guys with people in Pittsburgh. I don't know that they're there yet, but their approach is such that it should be able to get them there. Probably, let me think about that.
Linda, at one time, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area was doing some amazing work.
Gail, that's a good one. Yes, Charlotte is really good. What they did in terms of tackling the problem, doing the survey, working with parents, business involved, the whole 9 yards. Yes, that Mecklenburg County is another good example. There are pockets around here, and one of the things that I say, you've got the right people in the room from what I can tell. And this is where the solutions have to be at the community level. Because, and I say this all the time to people, we do a fair amount of work with NACO, the National Association of Counties. That's another group that can be really instrumental, your county leadership in this. But nobody else knows the problem. I was talking to a group of people in Kansas, and in one county in Kansas, there's a business that's manufacturing that works 24 hours. The next county over doesn't have anything like that. The needs in that county that has 24-hour manufacturing going on, their childcare needs are so different than the neighboring county that has, just the pretty much standard work hours and ranching, etc. So that's why it's so important that the solutions are yours, not somebody like me or anybody even at the state level, to be honest with you. The problem I would add to that, though, is that we have people identified as, for the problem at the state level, we have not identified people who are responsible at the local level beyond just individual childcare providers.
The change in growth in the Huntsville area is going into more a manufacturing world than what they're accustomed to, which brings with it all of those rotating third shift, 24-hour operations. And the question was, what we've mentioned family daycare as an option, but what are some of the best ideas of how this community tries to get up to speed and address that new need for them? If you could point them to places, and the best I can share with you is that the medical centers across the country do it well. They've always operated 24 hours a day. So a medical center's campus is open 24 hours a day. There's no, you're not thinking about, kids in the dark and kids here and there. They're open all the time. So that's the best suggestion I can give, is to look at how healthcare facilities have done it. So Linda, what's your top two things about the odd hour care for the manufacturing sector?
I think this is where it gets tricky, and this is why I advise people to be very careful about parent surveys, because even the healthcare industry, the gaming industry, for example, in Las Vegas and down on the Gulf Coast, they have tried 24-hour childcare. We in the military tried 24-hour childcare, and we never did it successfully, because most parents do not want their child in a childcare center or somewhere on a cot or a mat at night. And so I think this is where you really have to talk to parents and figure out, what do they really want? Not that they're going to say, yeah, I'll use a 24-hour childcare center, because they say they will and they won't. Trust me. I think most people understand that. I think this is where you look at a combination of solutions. And one of the combinations is, can you work with some of your childcare providers to extend their hours? And what is the cost of doing that? So for example, a lot of the survey work, and you can go look at this on our website. We have asked parents, what hours of care do you need? And for the most part, parents need the need beyond the regular business hours is between 6 and 8 in the evening. And so can you somehow figure out how to maybe subsidize a childcare provider to stay open 2 more hours as a partial solution, and then look at family childcare providers as another part of the solution? But you also have to understand that these things cost more, not less. And that's where people get in trouble, because a lot of times they'll say, well, if you stay open till 8 o'clock, you won't have so many kids, so therefore it's less expensive. No, it's actually more expensive, because it's harder to recruit people. There's a number of factors in there. So I would look at a combination of looking at your hours and looking at home-based care and having special home-based care. In the military, we actually licensed home-based care, family child care providers for those hours, because we wanted to understand sleeping conditions and egress and some of those things. So look at how you might use both.
And Linda, we licensed family child care and nighttime care as well, because there are some different regulations you would want to make sure of for overnight care. The biggest problem that we had with families who told us what they needed was 24-hour care. We built the facility. It was a home-like thing. Michelin was a heavy investor in it. And what we did not account for is the fact that if mama works the third shift and the baby is perfectly well cared for in this lovely facility we built, when mama gets off her shift work in the morning and picks up a 2 or 3 year old, they're ready to raise hell for 3 hours. They're ready to be up and out and going, and mom needs some rest. So it does not account for that piece of it, and no magician can account for that. So we had the exact same experience. We went on what families told us they needed, and what we really needed to listen to is that these single mother with a very young child doesn't need to work the third shift, is what I finally said. How about we look at that a different way? That's just me. I didn't get to run it, Linda, but I did get to suggest it.
You know, the other thing that I would say to you all too is to look at the rates that you're paying, even now with the current system, let alone where we may be headed here soon. What we have found in our looking at family childcare is I think only in maybe a handful of states do they actually pay the same rate for family childcare as you pay for centers. And some would argue, well, there's a lot more expenses in the center than there is in a home. But the flip side of that is that your home-based providers work longer hours. Generally speaking, home-based providers work somewhere around 12 plus hours a day, whereas in a childcare center, a teacher works 8. And so are you factoring into your home-based care rates, your family childcare rates, enough to actually incentivize people to want to do some of these things? So if you want, extended hours, do you pay more to get them, not less? Okay. And the rates are really a critical piece of this, especially for family childcare. I think that the one thing I would say to everyone is what we have to stop doing is thinking that we can tweak childcare, somehow fix it and make it cheaper. And we just can't do that. I don't think there is no the balloon to squeeze here. And so what we really have got to figure out is how do we get the funding into these programs to pay what it takes to do it? And stop thinking, well, if we just increase the ratios or we do, that we can tweak around the edges and make childcare work. And I think if we didn't learn anything in COVID, we should have learned that one. We just can't do it anymore. So this gap between what a parent can afford to pay and what it costs to do the work, we've got to address that gap before we can address the gap in what we have out there.
Yes, Linda, there's a question, and it's from Lucia from our local chamber here. What at the national level can you share with us? How are you involved in the advocacy on the Build Back Better and how it might impact childcare and preschool?
Yeah, I think that's a bit loaded question there, but let me try to answer that. As most of you've heard, and in the conversations from Washington, there's 2 pieces of the Build Back Better. One of them is childcare and funding to get parents to give parents more what we call vouchers, okay, or certificates. The other one is funding to do the pre-K. So there's the pre-K funding and the childcare funding. The childcare funding, we've been working very hard on trying to get this to be a little bit more balanced in terms of investments between money going into certificates and money going into what I call the supply side of the equation. So in the Build Back Better, there are provisions in the first 3 years of Build Back Better that in effect, the states who sign up for this will be for 3 years getting increased funding based on their PCDBG percentages, okay? In year 4, it kicks into an entitlement. So that means that anybody who wants a certificate can get one, depending on their income, how much they get will vary. So it's pretty heavily focused, though, on what I call the demand side of the equation. In other words, parents get vouchers and take them somewhere. There are provisions in the first 3 years for investments in the supply. And this is where I think we're going to have to focus our efforts. You all or people around the country are going to have to focus on investing in the supply, because if all of these parents now have a voucher and there's no childcare to purchase, we have not accomplished anything. So we really need to look at the supply side of this equation, figure out how we can get grants and contracts to providers to expand care. And to the point that you're talking about in this meeting, there will be funds in there that can be used for facilities, whether it's family child care or centers. There's funding in there for expanding the supply for the first 3 years. Okay, so that's pretty important. And I think states and communities are going to have to look at it. The one thing I would say to Huntsville and to this group is there's a provision in both the child care and the pre-K side of the equation. They're heavily dependent on whether your state signs up to take this funding. Okay, and that's going to require a lot of things going through legislatures, etc. If a state does not take the money, there's a provision in both the child care side and the pre-K side that will allow for communities. It's going to be a city government, a county government, a unit of government to apply for funds. There'll be a separate amount of money put in there. Now, we've been trying to get that amount increased because we're concerned that states might not take the money and communities like yours won't have any advantage or be able to access this. So there is a provision. I think right now it's a little bit under $1 billion of funding that communities can apply for if the state doesn't take this. There's a match on the state requirements, depending on the year and whether it's quality dollars or the voucher dollars. It's complicated, but I think it's optional for the states. If the state doesn't take it, then you will just be getting your CCDBG allocations.
Thank you, Linda. A couple of more questions here at the front.
Sure. I didn't know if we knew for our community what percentage of the most expensive slots, which are infant slots, we have as a gap.
Linda, the question was, do we know in this community how many of the most expensive slots, infant slots, are a part of that gap of 39%?
In Alabama, I'll go back and ask the question. I don't think we know. And this is a problem, I think in only a handful of states. North Carolina was one, Indiana was another. Do states track the capacity by age of child? And what I don't think we have for Alabama is the capacity of the programs by the age of the child, in which case we cannot tell you what percentage of the gap is infants. I will check that for you.
Allison Mullendorf is with the Alabama School Readiness Alliance. That's one of the statewide initiatives with whom we partner to get what we need for young children and families. She can also, after she asks her question, describe the Alabama Child Care Coalition, which is the group I referenced that Voices for Alabama's Children is heading up. 2 specific ways you can join on, help with advocacy. There are cards at your table that you're going to use for your discussion in a minute, so I just threw that in there.
Yes, I'm Allison Mullendorf with the Alabama School Readiness Alliance, proud to partner with Gail and Alabama Partnership for Children and Voices for Alabama's Children and so many others. And we've been known for our pre-K advocacy efforts, but pre-K in a vacuum is not a solution. We have to look at a comprehensive solution for pre-K and childcare together. And we are very proud of the fact that Alabama's pre-K program is diverse delivery, and childcare programs can take advantage of large grants from our state pre-K program for their 4-year-old classrooms, which will help them, with that economic model in their center and also help them improve quality. But my colleague, Collier Tynes, wave to everybody in the back. She is the new CEO of Voices for Alabama's Children, and I think this is her 2nd week on the job, so we've thrown her right into the fire. But I think Gail mentioned the Voices Alabama Child Care Coalition. Now, this is that group that I hope all of you will sign up to join. Just write that on your action sheets if that's one of the things you'd like to participate in. The Child Care Coalition sees a need for a state investment in child care. All of the money, the public money that goes to childcare in Alabama is from what Linda has been talking about, CCDBG, the Child Care Development Block Grant. We know that it is not sufficient, and Linda, this is a question I wanted to ask you. CCDBG gives vouchers to parents to pay for childcare, and then that goes to the centers. But it is based on market rate surveys. So basically, we're taking this broken market rate and using that as a way to base the government subsidies that go into childcare. So the government subsidies are not enough. Linda, can you explain that and talk about some states that have worked to close that gap between what the federal government provides and what is the cost of care? North Carolina comes to mind, among others.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Allison, in terms of, I think we've known for a number of years that the market rate survey approach, it doesn't work. I mean, we all know that essentially what you end up is getting back on a survey what parents can afford to pay, which is why I always do the numbers. And if you look at the numbers, the average around, I think in Alabama, $12,000 for an infant. That's roughly $200 a week. And that's what parents tell us in our surveys is the most they can afford to pay. So it's not a surprise that, that we seem to be a cat chasing our tail on this thing. And this is particularly true, Allison, in home-based care, because there's not enough, the market is so broken when it comes to the survey that we don't even get good data of what parents are actually paying in family child care. So that's why those things are so depressed. But essentially, if, what we have to do, and I think there are states that are looking at this, I think Illinois comes to mind as having done a lot of work on cost allocation model. There are states around the country that have done that. They look at the actual cost of care and then look at cost. If you want to increase the wages by this much, what is the cost to do that? So that you begin to base whatever the amount of money per child is on that. Massachusetts is doing some of that. Connecticut's doing some of that. Maine, I think, is doing some of that. So there's states that are beginning to understand that the market survey is completely flawed. And I think a lot of us have known that for many years and are just coming to grips with it. In the Build Back Better legislation, they call for a cost allocation model, which is exactly what we need to do. And then we need to figure out, once we have those costs, then how do we support that? Rather than here's what people can afford to pay, and that's how much we give you, because we're gonna stay in this cycle until we fix this. Somebody that's looked at market rate surveys a lot is Bobby Weber out at Oregon. In Oregon, you can look at some of her work. But yeah, Allison, if the sooner you can move to a cost of care model rather than a market rate, you will probably be better. And if you think about schools, this is the other thing, I said this to groups in the past. If you think about a school, we need to figure out how to stabilize the income. If you think, okay, we have a kindergarten class, and there are 15 children in that class. If they lose 3 children, we don't cut the teacher's pay because we lost 3 children. We fund that classroom on an annual basis. And then at the end of the year, we look at what's it going to cost next year. And do we actually need that classroom? But we don't in the middle, because 3 families move, decide we're going to cut what we're giving that classroom to operate. That's where we have got to start to focus. What does it cost to do a class for 4 infants, for 8, toddlers, whatever, however your ratios are?
Linda, I can't remember, is it New Mexico or Arizona that's just done a comprehensive actual cost of care model?
I think it's New Mexico.
I talked with them last week, and y'all, this is part of the question. Until we know what the circumstance is, we can't even propose the solutions. So Linda, thank you so very much. One final question. It's a quick one.
Yeah, quick one. Quick question, Linda. I didn't see any studies or numbers done on birth rates. And so in a town like ours with a lot of high degrees have less kids generally. And so lower degrees, so we're thinking the manufacturing sector, they have more kids. So I've heard you talk about these new neighborhoods, but new neighborhoods aren't necessarily where families on lower income are moving into. And so how have you seen groups focus on those areas of poverty or near poverty in their city to get daycare into pre-existing neighborhoods in areas where there's a higher birth rate than other parts of the city? And I could be wrong in that understanding, but
You're sort of right. I think that there's it really just it's very regional and very dependent on a number of factors. The birth rate's going down in this country, and at somewhat alarming rates. If businesses are concerned about right now in recruiting, we've actually seen a dip in the birth rate over the last few years and since COVID, which I think surprises a lot of people. There are things that can be done. This is where you need to get your housing people involved, because HUD has funding that that can be used. That's the Community Development Block Grant that can be used on this. You actually have a very unique thing going on in Alabama at Auburn at the, what's it called? The Rusty Smith.
Rural Studio.
Yeah, Rural Studio. That's a really interesting model that we've been watching, and I recommend it to people in neighborhoods where you can put a small program. He's designed a house that can be converted into a small childcare center. You can put it in some of these neighborhoods and at a reasonable cost. And in Alabama, that cost is very reasonable because of construction down there. So I think that there are solutions. Some of them have to do with getting with your housing people and HUD in particular, and seeing where those neighborhoods are, what they can do. The final thing I'll say on this is, which is really interesting, if you can get your housing people engaged in this, I have talked to people around the country that say, actually housing costs of maintaining housing development, especially in low-income neighborhoods, the costs go down when you have childcare, because children are actively engaged and they're not sometimes left at home alone, especially school-age kids. And so I think there's one city in California that has actually tracked it and found it was cheaper to invest in a childcare center than to keep up, trying to fix housing when children were left unsupervised. So I've always wanted to do a cost benefit on that and never had the time to do it. But there are solutions to things like that. And probably we could spend a lot more time talking about that, but I could think about some other things that might help you on that.
I'm glad you mentioned babies, infants and toddlers. In your folders is a sheet that is built out from the annual yearbook. There's a yearbook for babies and how babies are faring across the country. We were so excited when we got this because Alabama has improved on 5 or 6 or 7 different things, including poverty. We are also better than the national average on 3 or 4 positive indicators for babies, and that is cause for celebration. When we're in that rarefied air, and it doesn't have to be with football, we need to celebrate it. So we're making progress for babies. I want to point your attention there.
So thank you to Linda and to Gail. I'm Lindsay Ferguson with the Chamber, for those of you that I don't know. And so Lynn told you all this morning that we also brought you here to do some work. And so now is the time that we're going to put you to a little bit of work. We've spent a lot of time talking about what's going on, the state of childcare, the challenges. Some of them you probably knew, some of them are new, and your head probably feels like it's going to explode because there's just a lot. Kind of like Beth also said, there's just a lot to unpack here. But what we would like for you guys to do is to take some time to come together in the groups that you're just kind of already sitting in at your tables. Some of you have smaller tables and some of you have full tables. So if you're at a smaller table, you're welcome to go and make a full table, or you're welcome to work at the table that you're at. Whatever works for you and wherever you would like to be. But if you want to stand up and stretch your legs and have an excuse to do that, you are welcome to do so. You have some cards on your table. So these smaller cards that have the Alabama Partnership for Children logo on them. Each of you, we would like to fill out this card. It has some questions for you to think about and some potential action items that maybe you would like to take or see your business or your organization take. So the first thing I'd like you to do is take a look at this card and think about it individually. We're going to shorten some of our times that are up here because we had really good discussion, but I also want to commit to getting you guys out of here by 11 o'clock like we scheduled to. So if you can take 2 minutes or so to look through that card. After you do that, on each of your tables, you also have a pretty agenda of everything we've gone through today. And on the back of that agenda, you have kind of a worksheet for you to use at your table. So what we'd like for you to do, I'm actually going to change this first question. We're going to ask you individually to write down the 2 most important things you heard today. We want to know that because it's helpful for feedback. But to Linda's challenge from this morning, instead of answering that question at your table, what I'd like you to do is identify what's the biggest problem we're trying to solve. What do you think is the biggest problem? And then based on that, we want you to have some discussion specifically focused on the kind of group of people that are noted on your sheet. So some of your sheets say local civic groups and philanthropy. Some of your sheets say employers and companies. And some of your sheets say local community leaders and elected officials. So I want you to think from those lenses, what are some of the actions that we can take as a community? And then we're going to come together to share those out across the room. So we're going to take until about 10:40 to go through all of those conversations and then share them out so we can capture some of those and then take that information for our next steps. So you guys have a little bit more than 20 minutes to think about some of that and have some discussions amongst yourself. Find yourself a scribe at your table that you can either volunteer or voluntel to take that action. And then we will come back together from there. And we'll have Gail and Allison and others kind of floating around the room if you want to have conversations with them as you're going through the activity at your table as well. Thank you guys for the good conversation. That's what we are hoping that this happens and brings forward. We do want to share out what some of those discussions are that happened at your tables. And so we will just kind of go around the room in the interest of time and conversation. For right now, what I'd like you to do is share with me the biggest challenge, so that big problem that you guys really zoned in on. And then I would like for you to pick your top thing that the group you focused on can do about it. And so we will capture those on these sheets of paper throughout the room. But I also will take those sheets that you guys wrote on so that we have all of that information that we can put together and pull back and share back out from this as well. But for right now, I'd like not only your biggest problem, but I want your top pick of what something that the group that you focused on can do to begin moving the needle on solving this problem too. Stephanie, what'd you guys talk about at your table?
That was what we talked about at our table. What Dick said and say yes.
Yes, wholeheartedly yes. We would like to hear more from the companies about creative ways that they can help with the problem. You know, whether it's cost sharing or whether it's more flex spending options for childcare. What kind of benefits in childcare are feasible for them to provide? What's working in other parts of the country that we could apply here? And I think one big question mark I have was, you know, what do local Huntsville, Madison County businesses here already offer? I don't even know. You know, maybe they're already doing some of those things, but it would be nice to know kind of where we're at before we can figure out where we can go.
Nancy, if I may,
Yep.
So back in the summer of the pandemic, we did a statewide survey of working families. We did it through the chamber here in the Huntsville area. So we have that data for your region. One of the questions we asked was, what kind of supports do Does your employer provide around childcare? So we did collect that data. It was in the midst of a pandemic.
Yeah.
But anyway, we do have that.
Okay. Awesome.
Great. Thanks, Gail. All right. Thank you, guys. Stephanie, what'd your table talk about? It's next, Stephanie. Jim?
All right. So I'm Jim Deal with Torch Technologies. What we came up with, the biggest challenge was the supply of child care professionals is really the biggest problem. You address that by providing funds to get them the required pay. And looking at it from a business standpoint, there are lots of things that businesses can do, but it depends on the industry you're in as to how you can do that, right? It's very industry dependent. I'm in a defense industry, but we also have a sister company that's in commercial real estate. So the two of those things together could probably do some things different than what Toyota manufacturing could do, or Toyota Mazda, whatever, a manufacturing or commercial company. So from our standpoint, there's a couple of things from a business standpoint we want to avoid, and a couple of things we would be more interested in doing. We want to avoid the liability of being a provider of child care. That's not our line of business. We don't want to get into that line of business, but it would be, useful for the percentage of young adults who have children that work for us to be able to help them with child care. So we could invest in facilities, in partnerships with other contractors, other businesses, with a qualified provider, similar to what was done with Toyota, where the provider is actually providing the facility or the child care, but we invest and provide a facility or provide some funding for the facility for it. Now, Teledyne did this many, many years ago, where there's a child care facility right on their campus, a building, and somebody else, a provider, comes in and provides that health care. So there are ways to do that. Another thing that was brought up was having a flexible spending account that provides the opportunity for people to save for their child care and use that money pre-tax for child care, as well as other things. That makes it even for everybody across the company. Companies can, in some cases, invest in child care, provide child care credits, if you will, for the employees, and also do grants to providers to provide additional child care. And I will say we partner with Village of Promise every year to help them by basically running a golf tournament, and the proceeds from that golf tournament go to Village of Promise. So that's another way, thinking outside the box, of how do you creatively provide funds to people that are trying to break the cycle of poverty by providing education.
Great. Thank you, guys. All right, this table over here, and I think one of the things that I put up here also that I know you guys spoke to is, like, what did we not talk about today? So I know there's something that you guys had there as well. So what's the problem that you guys focused on and some of the solutions?
The ARC with Madison County and Dina with the UAH ELC program. But the one thing that we are really focused on that nobody has touched on at all today is special needs children. Huntsville is full of special needs children. Young engineer families are coming, young professionals, young workers, and all the shift workers, and no one's touched on special needs families. And that is, to us, the work that we do. Nobody wants to take them. Nobody wants to take them. Those are the kids that are getting kicked out of daycare. Those are the kids that, if you're on a feeding tube or oxygen, these daycares don't have nursing care to take your child. So it doesn't matter what degree you have or what great jobs you can get, nobody's taking your child so you can go to that job. So for us in the job that we do, we've got the capacity, like Dina said, we can train professionals, we can educate them, we can advocate for those parents, we can do a lot of these things, but if the providers and the services aren't there, we can't help them. I mean, I don't think there is any daycares in Huntsville right now, Madison County, Madison City, Huntsville, that will take a child on a feeding tube. There are none.
Not even UAH, because we don't have a nurse on campus that is dedicated to our site. I think that is the number one biggest need, other than our children who are diagnosed on the autism spectrum or who have behaviors that don't fit into that cookie cutter box of 12 2-year-olds in a classroom. And it again goes back to funding, which it's just difficult to find those funding sources.
And Huntsville alone has the highest rate of autistic children than anywhere in the 50 states. It is Huntsville, which we've known that for years in the business that we do, but you can look at, because we have the biggest population of engineers than anywhere in the United States.
And they're diagnosed more frequently now.
I was about to say,
Yes.
we have a better system of resources
We do.
that gets an earlier diagnosis.
We do.
Yes.
And I can almost say when I get a referral as the director at UAH, when I get a referral from early intervention with a child or family wanting to come in, if they're receiving speech and occupational therapy and special instruction, my brain says they're probably on the spectrum and they're just not diagnosed yet. So we try to work with the Riley Center, who is one of one that really can provide those very much needed services. There are a few other places that are trying to expand, but we're open to any suggestions that anyone has.
And most daycare centers aren't equipped, their teachers aren't equipped to deal with children that are outside your typical box child that we're talking about today.
Well,
So,
frankly, K through 12 schools are not either.
right,
True.
true.
Let's
But
get
this
all
this
from
table
there.
basis is more pre-K related, so.
One thing I find it difficult that we still have to say this, but early intervention serves children through the age of 2.
Three.
Three. When the child turns 3, the child becomes the responsibility of the local school system.
If the parents choose.
Well, all that's
Right.
wrapped up in it, but as far as the funding, how it works, 0 to 2 is early intervention, but at age 3, it's the responsibility of the local education system. And what we've put together and patched together is having the school system pay for the nurse that accompanies that child in a child care setting who does know what to do with a feeding tube.
Which is
or a
another thing we
quadriplegic.
talked about, though. Some
So-
of our systems, though, if you're a special needs parent, those kids at 3 only get 2 days a week school.
No matter what.
So no matter what is wrong with the child.
Right.
So then you've got to do 3 days a week at a daycare that won't take them, or if you find someone, you've got to pay 5 days a week because you can't just pay for 3 days a week.
Yeah.
So that's.
I think, I'm sure we'll have follow-up conversations to this in the future. I think we should definitely bring in the Alabama Department of Rehabilitation Services and maybe even Easter Seals, because they work with a lot of child care facilities who, if they are, providing services for a child that does have a disability, even a learning disability or autism, they're able to come in and provide services for those children. So,
Well, that's who
And
we
we
are.
do
We are
have
with the
someone
Alabama
representing
Department we have.
UCP
We're
with
the ARC, but we
the SEEP grant. So they do, that is the purpose of the grant, is to go into childcare centers and provide training and follow-up, and it's a wonderful.
But that's if they take if
Right.
once they have a place to go, so it is.
Right.
So this is definitely one of those, we didn't talk about this, and I anticipate we could probably spend just as much time talking about it. So I don't want to come across as dismissive to it, but I also want to make sure that we capture it for some follow-up and that we don't miss out on some of our other pieces. So thank you guys for highlighting it and being here. All right, my rowdy table. What'd y'all talk about?
That's not fair. So I guess the biggest problem that we highlighted was that somebody has to own this issue. They have to say, whether it's an agency, a person, or several different agencies together, we're gonna, so slot funding is an option Aaron came up with to better serve businesses, but who takes that temperature from all of the childcare centers to find out what they have open and then communicates that to local businesses so they can take advantage of it? Even if we provided vouchers to our employees, we don't know what's open and what's out there. That's one side of it, but the real truth is that whether you're talking about the parent of a special needs kid who only can get 2 days a week of childcare, or the parent who just decided that difference in what they were paying for childcare and what they make a year was negligible, it was not good enough to stay home with their kid, our workforce found other solutions, right? They didn't come back to us. So businesses have to realize that, this isn't about precision. We can't figure out what Mazda Toyota's loss is if we don't provide childcare. We have to look at the greater community workforce issue and say the cost is too great to allow people to come up with their own solutions because they will not come back to us. They figured it out in the pandemic. Moms will figure it out no matter what the problem is that's in front of them. Parents will figure it out. So the cost really is, if we don't solve the childcare problem from the business and government side, then our parents will just solve it for us and we won't have workers. I don't know if that was a solution.
It's a clear problem. We continue to lament the pandemic, but we have to pull the kernels of wisdom from it.
Right.
We have to learn from what we were taught with a real harsh blow as employers. Take that and go forward in re-engineering this whole new system, fixing the business model that doesn't exist,
Right.
but using what we learned.
And I think a lot of businesses go to the childcare providers and say, well, so what should we do? And the childcare providers are saying, give us money to run our business and pay our staff. And as we saw, it's not a supply and demand, it's not a market equity issue. That does not exist in childcare, and no matter what we try to do to tweak it, it will not exist. So the truth is that the businesses and the government entities have to start solving the problem and bringing the childcare providers in for their expertise.
All right, thank you guys. How about you guys? What'd y'all talk about?
So I think a lot of what I'm hearing today is funding, and it seems like the solution is organization. I think it's clear that there needs to be some kind of liaison in place to handle kind of the administrative burden that we're seeing, and then the reality of this entrepreneurial thing that doesn't really kind of work in a natural way. So we've kind of talked about the idea of getting involved with the local government, and I'd like to see us interact with City Council and talk to Tommy Battle about putting a liaison person or organization in place to pattern funding for facilities. And then we can find out what the gaps are afterwards and adjust accordingly, according to what employers can do.
So our solution, we thought that the leadership, if the city and the council and the mayor got behind it, they have funding, so they could have a staff position, they could have a series, so that could be our central coordinator of what we're trying to do. Chamber could do it, it's limited funds, you gotta raise money. The city's got the money. The taxes, the city's doing well now with our growth. Let them take the financial burden of staffing and putting all the coordination together, be the central source, and then we start branching out from that to implement facilities, to implement there's funding, go to CBG, all the things that the city could do that as individual organizations we can't do.
Great. Thank you, guys. How about y'all? What'd you talk about?
Well, so we talked about business and industry investing in the workers because everybody needs a livable wage. That's the biggest problem, is that our workers in this industry are not making enough money. So if you put scholarships and co-ops towards your community colleges or other institutions that are educating these people, training these people, they could have co-ops in childcare, so real-world experience, we call work-based learning programs, and subsidize their wage. Because that's the problem that we see in Huntsville in fast food and childcare, is you can go work at a manufacturing institute for more.
All right. How about you guys? What'd you talk about?
Good morning, my name is Chris Brown with Huntsville Utilities, and a lot of the things that we talked about have been discussed at these other tables. One of the other things that I do want to touch on is in regards to land. So we talked about the gap assessment and the map of where that gap exists, and as far as when houses are being developed and so forth or what have you. So maybe partnering with the government or local officials to where there's land that's actually allocated to business daycare owners, so that either there's a grant that they apply for or a scholarship or what have you, but there is some type of allocation for that land so that those child care centers and facilities can be built.
Great. Thank you, guys. All right. Last but not least, front of the room.
So a lot has been covered. A lot has been covered. So we had the civic and philanthropy topic, and one of the things that we felt was the biggest issue was that demographics issue that you had brought up of just, do we know how many kids fall into that most expensive category? And when y'all brought up kids with disabilities that I've had the privilege of working with before, is just, wow, that's a whole nother cost metric that's not even in our math. So we're talking about a business problem that we don't even have the problem, and so I think it's very important that philanthropy, our foundations, our funds could get behind true boots on the ground volunteer research, door-to-door research to build the platform for the advocate. Whoever that advocate is, instead of them leading the way for that information, how do we develop a commercial base that speaks to all Huntsville residents? Yeah, how many moms and dads, single employees don't even know what the problem is? They just know there's a problem. And if we could tell the story through media, through content, then we could get awareness out to the city. So when the mayor and our city leaders have to make an uncomfortable move to do the right thing, we need the people of Huntsville to be behind and unified on what the problem really is. And so that demographic issue, of course, we believe a champion is, as you guys were saying, is so important, but we almost need to get a groundswell going before that, of just general Huntsville city awareness, and then we talked a little bit too about the business model in general. We're a bunch of Huntsville Hospital representatives. Why does daycare operate in the commercial industry at all?
Right.
If Huntsville Hospital is a nonprofit and making income, could Huntsville revolutionize the market and develop a model of daycare that's built on the same model that a museum or a science institute or something's built on, so that way we can show the country the model, hey, this is how you can fund it. This is how it is possible. And so we thought with that groundswell of awareness, more people would get excited about, hey, let's build an entirely new business model that can fund it. So
Great. So lots of good discussion, a lot of information. So what we will do is please leave all the things you wrote on your tables, because I will collect them. So even some of the things that maybe you said out loud or that I didn't capture correctly, I want to make sure I get from that. We'll put this information together. We will do follow-up with everyone who is in attendance here. I know we all are past due, but I promise that I'll be fast to dismiss you. So we will look at what our task force and engagement needs to look like going forward. But I think, there's two kind of big things. One is a funding conversation, and two is who continues to always own and drive this, that's thinking about it from the time they wake up until the time they go to sleep. And so, where do we have opportunities to solve that will be some of our next action items, and we will share some follow-up with you all. Thank you guys for staying with us a little bit past 11. Thank you for being here this morning. Hope you all have a great weekend, and we'll be back in touch soon.